Hey there. I think you're muted.
Sorry.
There you are.
For a whole minute, I was speaking by myself. All right. So I'll do a quick recap for hopefully for folks who are joining us not the first time. You know our show. So my name is Shavi. I am a product manager at LinkedIn and host for LinkedIn Learning's product management learning series. So a series of live streaming events where we interview industry thought leaders and product practitioners to share their career journey and best lessons they learned along the way to inspire PMs like you to level up your product career. So make sure you subscribe to our newsletter to receive event recap and future event update. So today we have a very special guest, Nir Eyal. You do so many things. When I was researching your profile, I get really amazed. I hopefully we get to talk about a little bit about your portfolio career, but basically you write, you teaches, you consult, you invest in different companies. And you wrote two of my favorite Wall Street best-selling books. One of them is Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, hopefully very useful for product managers. And I am very proud to say I consider myself one of the early readers of your book when it first came out in 2014, early 2014. It was my introduction to product psychology. I remember I was so fascinated by some of the examples that you put in the book that I took a lot of notes with stickies and just really loved it. And I think a couple of years after you published Hooked, you published another book, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. Basically, the opposite of the hook model, to be unhooked in the world full of distractions. So hopefully we get to talk about both of your books and your models today. They are very helpful for product managers, both to build better products and also how to stay focused and productive in a very busy world. So let's see what we have. Folks joining us today, please introduce yourself, where you're joining us from, and apologize again for the first minute without sound. All right. So Nir, we're really honored to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us. Why don't we start it with you telling us a little bit about your career journey, how you get into the world of product, and what led you to write the book Hooked?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm what you call a behavioral designer. I help companies build the kind of products and services that get people hooked to healthy habits. So I work with companies in the educational space to get people hooked to online learning. I work with companies in the fintech space to get people hooked to saving money. I work with companies in every conceivable industry wherever there is repeat engagement. So when you think about SaaS products, when you think about healthcare, when you think about any product that requires repeat engagement, that requires a habit, that's where I work with products and services to help people get hooked to healthy habits. Now, the flip side is that sometimes when we overuse a product, they can be a distraction. But just to clarify, Indistractable is not unhooked, that it's not a negation, it's a complement, that we can use the psychology of product design to get people hooked to good habits while also understanding the psychology of how these products are designed to break the bad habits that don't serve us in our life.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to learn about how can we build healthy habits to help build more impactful products, but also, understand the psychology behind and be able to focus and, tune our attention, feed our attention to do the most impactful work. So we do have a lot of folks dialing in today from all over the world. Pedro joining us from Portugal. We have Indra from Indonesia. Josh joining us from Denver. Carrie from Arkansas. uh, Houston, someone from Houston, people from joining from India, Toronto, Phoenix. Thank you so much, folks, for joining us. And I also noticed is that with different time zones at different part of the world, and it's a Friday night, so thanks for tuning in. So, Nir, I think it would be really helpful to either as a memory refresher for many of the people who have read your book, or someone new to this concept, to maybe have you kind of walk us through the hook model, the 4 steps.
Sure.
I think as PMs, we're most interested in learning how we can apply that, when it comes to thinking about our own product. So, for example, I work on LinkedIn Learning. So, we're constantly helping learners to build a learning habit. But just like going to gym, working out, eating healthy, you knew it's important to learn. But, sometimes after a long workday, you could feel like your motivation's waning. So the pressure is there, but developing a habit to continuous learning can still be a challenge. So how would you apply, say, this hook model to help us decide better, you know, um, learning products to help people form a learning
Yeah.
habit?
Yeah, so let's walk through the hook model here. So the hook model begins with an external trigger. That's the first step there. The external trigger is something in our outside environment that gives us some piece of information for what to do next. It's a ping, a ding, a ring, anything in our outside environment that prompts us towards action. The next step of the hook is the action phase. And the action phase is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. So on LinkedIn, it's just scrolling the feed, right? The LinkedIn feed has all this content that just by scrolling the feed, that's the action. That's the key habit that LinkedIn has designed so brilliantly. Next comes the variable reward phase. The variable reward phase is about giving the user what they came for, and yet having this bit of mystery, this bit of uncertainty around what they might find when they use the product. So this comes out of the classic work of B.F. Skinner, the father of operant conditioning, and he found that the rate of response, the more we are more likely to engage in something when there is a bit of variability. It's called an intermittent reinforcement. So that scrolling mechanism, whether it's on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, anytime you see a scroll, a feed, a swipe left, swipe right, that is a variable reward. It's uncertainty that keeps us coming back. It's the same thing that gets us to watch movies. It's the same thing that makes us watch sports. It's uncertainty. And so what you find, whether it's consumer web or enterprise products, there has to be some type of uncertainty. So in the enterprise space, it's very easy to understand this in the consumer web space, but in the enterprise space, think about a dashboard, right? Where you've got up and down, right? Think about financial services, right? Everybody's watching the stock market these days. Why? Because it's going up and down. It's variable. There's uncertainty there. So that's a key component of the hook model. And finally, the investment phase, which is probably the most important application, the most important piece of the hook model, which is the most overlooked, because this is where the user puts something into the product to make it better with use. So what differentiates habit-forming products from all the other products is that habit-forming products appreciate with use. They get better and better the more we interact with them. And we call this stored value. So the more data, content, reputation, skill acquisition, followers that we accrue on a platform, the stickier it becomes and the more likely we are to return in the future. So that eventually, through consecutive cycles through the hook model, eventually a habit-forming product doesn't need those external triggers at all. Eventually, a habit-forming product begins to form an association with an internal trigger. What is an internal trigger? An internal trigger is an uncomfortable emotional state that we seek to escape. Uncertainty, loneliness, boredom, fatigue, stress, anxiety. The ultimate goal of a habit-forming product is to no longer need spammy messaging, no longer need expensive advertising, but to trigger the user on their own when they feel a certain emotion, they look to your product or service out of habit with little or no conscious thought. So the external trigger are the training wheels to eventually form a habit, an association with the internal trigger. And of course, through successive cycles, this is how our preferences are shaped and our habits are formed.
Thanks for illustrating the model. I think you mentioned briefly this can also be applied to both consumer as well as enterprise product. I think one of our learners, Anishwa, she's interested in learning about how to apply this model to some of the B2B product. You mentioned a little bit about dashboard. Do you have other
Yeah,
examples to illustrate how when we
sure.
think about enterprise product, it could be a little bit boring, a little bit serious.
No.
How can we apply the
So
hook model?
the same exact rules apply. The only criteria is that the behavior occurs with sufficient frequency. So if the behavior does not occur within a week's time or less, it's probably not a good candidate to form a habit. Okay, so habit forming products really do need to be used with sufficient frequency. The more often it is used, the more likely people are to form a habit, which is what's so revolutionary about these devices. The average smartphone user checks their home screen 150 times per day. So the habit forming potential of these devices now is suddenly very, very high because of that frequency. But if you're building an enterprise product, let's say you're building, some kind of cybersecurity software where it's bought but it's not used. Well, that would be a sales-led organization, right? A product-led organization is one where the product incentivizes people to use it on their own, not because they have to, but because they want to. So as long as your product in the B2B space is a product that needs to be used frequently, so SaaS products, right? If you don't use a SaaS product, the customer churns out, they're going to stop paying you. But not every product is necessarily a good candidate to form a habit. Again, if it's not used with sufficient frequency, at least once a week, there are some things you can do. You can actually bolt on habits onto a product that is not used with sufficient frequency. It's a little more difficult to do, but there are some things we can do. But really, the same 4 steps, trigger, action, reward, and investment, apply to enterprise as well as consumer web. So when you think about GitHub, Stack Overflow, Salesforce, Slack, all of these products use the same exact hook model. You'll see it time and time again. It doesn't matter enterprise or consumer. The big differentiation is frequent or infrequent. If it's an infrequent product, sales driven, you don't need the hook model. But if it's a product led company that needs repeat engagement, that's when you need the hook model. So the takeaway here is not every product needs a habit, but every product that needs a habit needs a hook.
I like that. Garrison, our learner, summarized it. Habit forming product needs to be used in sufficient frequency. And then one example of an investment is, for example, user created a playlist on Spotify. So you have an attachment of like, I already spent the effort, building this playlist. So I might as well stick with the products.
Good learning. And of course, as you build a playlist, right? Spotify is famous for innovating in this way, but the as you listen, they're tracking all these what we call passive forms of investment. How long you listen, what kind of music you listen to, what genre it's in. They have this music genome project that makes the product better and better the more you use it. So that's a terrific example. Thank you, Cecily.
Awesome. All right. So you mentioned a little bit during the intro that you wanted to use the hook model to help people build healthy, products. So sometimes when it comes to habit, it's always this sort of double, edged sword where you can use it for good, but sometimes habits can become addictive. If it's being manipulated or users feel like, it's bad for them. So how would you think business should use this hook model to help build habits for good? And use technology for good.
So the problem that the vast majority of people listening today have is not anyone getting addicted to their product, right? Nobody's getting addicted to enterprise SaaS software. Okay. Nobody's getting addicted to language learning software. This is not a problem. The big problem is not that a few products like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok have figured out how to suck us in. The real problem is that far too many products suck. That's a much bigger problem, that we don't use these techniques enough. Think about how many products you use every day. Enterprise software, local businesses, governments design these websites, design these apps that are horrible. Nobody can figure out how to use them. So we need more behavioral design, not less. So very few products actually addict people. The real problem most people have out there listening is that they have a product that would really improve people's lives if they just used it. So that's my goal. So the vast majority of people, you don't have to worry about anybody getting addicted to your enterprise software, your educational software, your healthcare software. Not going to happen. Now, some products can form addiction. And now what type of products? Look, any product that is an analgesic, anything that solves pain is potentially addictive to someone. Okay, anything that solves pain. There are cases of people getting addicted to aspirin. There are cases of people getting addicted to drinking water. I'm not joking. This is a real thing. So it's not the product alone that gets people addicted. It's the confluence of the product, the person, and the pain that person is in. So addiction is much more complicated than just, ooh, I like it a lot. And we need to stop using this vocabulary. You hear people saying, oh, I'm addicted to this, I'm addicted to that. Addiction is a pathology, okay? And by using that terminology, not only is that disrespectful to people who actually have this terrible disease, we don't talk about Tourette's this way, we don't talk about epilepsy this way, we shouldn't talk about addiction this way. It's also incredibly disempowering for us. Because when we think that we're addicted, that technology is hijacking our brains, which is utter nonsense, guess what people do? It's called learned helplessness. When you believe there's nothing you can do about a problem, guess what you do? Nothing. So it really doesn't serve us to have this image that we're getting addicted to our products and services. We're not addicted, the vast majority of us. Now, some people really are addicted, right? About 3 to 5% of the population do suffer from this disorder of an addiction. But not everybody who has a glass of wine with dinner is an alcoholic. Not everybody who has sex is a sex addict. That's ridiculous. So why do we think that everybody who uses technology is addicted? For the vast majority of people, it's not an addiction. It's a distraction. So we need to get real about what the problem is. The problem for the vast majority of us is not addiction. And unless you are a child, right, children deserve special protection, and people who are pathologically addicted deserve special protection. But everyone else, adults out there, if you're not a child and you're not someone who's pathologically addicted, it's going to be a personal responsibility issue for you.
Absolutely. I do agree that the real problem is that too many products don't deliver to a delightful experience. It's less of a problem of, trying to figure out how to make it less addictive because most people products are not there yet. I'm curious as a PM, like thinking about, their products, when do you think in the product development cycle it makes the most sense to use the hook model? Like, does it only use at the beginning of building a
Yeah.
product, or how can they continuously using this model to refine the product?
Great question. So there's two places where the hook model is most helpful. Number one, very early in the product development process. So when you're at the pencil sketch phase and you know that your product, in order to succeed, in order for the business model to thrive, requires repeat engagement, that's a great time to take out the hook model and ask yourself this 5 questions to make sure that your hook model is solid before you commit any code, before you hire designers, before you do anything. Write down with a pen and paper, what is the 4 steps of your core hook, your keystone habit. The other place of the hook model is, excuse me, is very helpful, is as a diagnostic tool. So most of the companies I work with, I tend not to work with companies in that very early stage. I tend to work with companies in a different stage. They call me the plumber. I'm the plumber because I help stop the leaks, right? Companies come to me when they have a great product, they have lots of users, but terrible retention, or they can't figure out how to keep users coming back. So we call these leaky buckets. So I stop up the leaks. How do I stop up the leaks? I look at the product and I analyze the core hook. And anyone can do this. You can take out the 4 steps of the hook model, ask yourself these 5 key questions: internal trigger, external trigger, action, reward, and investment. And make sure that if your product needs to build a habit, that you have those steps of the hook model built into the core experience of your user interface. So the 2 places it's useful, very, very early, or if you're trying to increase retention and engagement, it's a diagnostic tool to come up with hypotheses that you can then test to improve the product over time.
I like the two points that you mentioned. Any product that needs repeated engagement, which is majority of the SaaS product or any product that want to be successful and competing the mind share of a user, I think deserve to thinking about this four step model, and then also as a diagnostic tool. So it helps us to reinforce us to reflect on how can we make it more habit forming, how can we make it more delightful. You mentioned there's a very distinct difference between addiction and distraction. So let's talk more about distraction, because I'm curious to learn about your next framework, which is centered around how to become indestructible. And in today's world for product managers, that's really top mind when you have so much going on in the product world that you try to fight fires, you try to solve a lot of bugs, unblock your eng team for execution, but then your product vision depends on you to carve out time to do deep work, to think about the strategy, how to bring visibility to you, to your team, to your product. So what are some of the advice you will give people to help, increase our focus and productivity?
Yeah. So first of all, I wrote the book for me. So I found that I was getting distracted in my role. I found that I was, saying I would do one thing. I'd say I was going to work on that big project, but I'd get distracted and, check email or Slack channels or whatever else other than working on that big project. I would say I was going to exercise, but I didn't. I said I was going to eat right, but I wouldn't. And what I found was that I was constantly distracted by the things I know I needed to do, but for one reason or another, I didn't do. And that's the reality we find ourselves in today, that we all basically know what to do, right? If you want to lose weight, who doesn't know to eat right and exercise? We know. If you want to have better relationships with people, you have to be fully present with them. If you want to excel at your job, you have to do the hard work that other people don't want to do. We know this stuff. What we don't know is how to get out of our own way, how to stop getting distracted. So I believe that becoming indistractable will be the skill of the century, because there is no area of your life that doesn't depend on your ability to control your attention. Controlling your attention is critical for your mental health, for your physical health, for your work output, for your creativity, everything. If you cannot focus your time and attention, You can't be the kind of person you know you're capable of becoming. So if you don't mind, maybe you can put up that model. I'm very partial to 4-step models. So that was the hook model. This is the Indistractable model. So it doesn't go in a circle. It goes into axes. So the first place to look is the difference between traction and distraction. So traction is any action that pulls you towards what you said you were going to do, to the right there. Any action that you say in advance you are going to do, which, by the way, can include fun things, right? We need to stop moralizing and medicalizing perfectly normal behaviors. If you want to watch Netflix, or you want to go on YouTube, or you want to play a video game, there's nothing wrong with any of this stuff. We need to stop making people feel so guilty about these behaviors. As long as you do it according to your values and your schedule, it is traction. There's nothing wrong with it, as long as you plan ahead for it. The opposite of traction is distraction. Distraction is any action that pulls you away from what you plan to do. And just because it's a work-related task doesn't mean it's not a distraction. I'll give you a great example. For years, I would sit down at my desk at work and I would say, okay, I'm going to get started on that big project that I've been delaying, the thing I've been procrastinating on. Here I go. I'm going to get started right now. I'm going to get started. No more procrastination. But first, let me check some email. Right? Let me just scroll that Slack channel real quick, just to catch up on. Let me do some things on my to-do list, some easy stuff, just to get some momentum going, right? And I didn't realize that that is the most dangerous form of distraction. We think of distraction being our phones or Facebook or something that, takes us away, Candy Crush or whatever. That's obvious distraction. But what's a much more pervasive form of distraction is that work-related task that, if it's not what you plan to do with your time and attention, is by definition a distraction. So it's absolutely critical. Here's the thing I want you to remember. You cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it is distracting you from. Let me say it again. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it is distracting you from. So if you have a blank calendar, right, with a few a doctor's appointment and a meeting here and there, what did you get distracted from? Everything is a distraction unless you know what you got distracted from. So it's critical that we use our time, that we time box what we are going to do with our time and attention in advance. And this is why, by the way, to-do lists, right? Running your life on a to-do list is one of the worst things you can do for your personal productivity. Because if you're not moving those tasks to a time, it's just an aspiration. And in fact, it takes a psychic toll, because if you look at your to-do list day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, and you're still not doing the things on your to-do list, loser, you begin believing that there's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. There's something wrong with this stupid time management technique we keep using. So it's much better to not just write down things on your to-do list, but actually time box them in your calendar. That's the only way to know the difference between traction and distraction. But before we go into traction and distraction, we have to, so in order to become indistractable, we have to start with mastering the internal triggers. So we talked about those internal triggers in the hook model. Same internal triggers apply to anything that might lead us towards traction or distraction. It turns out, studies find that 90% of the time that we get distracted by our phones, 90%, is not because of a ping, ding, or ring. It's not an external trigger. 90% of the time, it's an internal trigger. So as we said earlier, boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, it's that mental association with where we seek relief from that emotional discomfort that cements these habits. So how do we break those bad habits? We have to understand what is that internal trigger that is driving us towards distraction. Because distraction is not a moral failing. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken in any way. It's simply that the vast majority of us have never learned methods to deal with this emotional discomfort in a healthy way that leads us towards traction versus trying to escape it with too much news, too much booze, too much football, too much Facebook. You are always going to find a distraction unless you know the ultimate source of that distraction, those internal triggers. And if you don't master those internal triggers, they will become your master. So now we just work our way around these 4 points. We master the internal triggers. We make time for traction. We hack back the external triggers, all those pings, dings, and rings in our environment. We can hack back all those. And then finally, we can prevent distraction with pacts by making what's called a pre-commitment, deciding in advance to erect a firewall against distraction as the last line of defense. So this is how anyone can become indistractable.
I love that. You need to know where the source of the distraction is to be able to master that internal trigger to actually overcome it. You can hack your way around it to mute yourself from those triggers and distractions. But
these things need to be done in concert. They need to be together. So if you just grayscale your phone, it's not going to work, right? If you just use a Pomodoro technique, it's not going to work. You have to do these 4 things in concert. Because if you use a Pomodoro technique or you grayscale your phone or whatever other cockamamie technique du jour you hear, but you haven't taken care of those internal triggers. And you're motivated to escape this discomfort and you don't know how to deal with that discomfort in a healthy way, you're going to find an excuse, right? You know it. I know it. I've been there, right? When I would sit down at my desk and say, oh, the laundry, I should probably go do the laundry. And you know what? There's that book over there I should read, right? It's not even about the technology. It's about these internal triggers. So that is the most important first step.
What are some of the practical tips that you go to kind of uncover all this like internal triggers and master them? Like, how
Yeah.
do you find comfort in that?
Yeah. So the idea is to have arrows in your quiver, to have tools ready to go so that when you feel that discomfort, you know what to do with it, right? What most people do, they're not conscious of these uncomfortable emotional states. And when they feel lonely, they check social media. When they're bored, they scroll the news. When they're uncertain, they Google, right? With little or no conscious thought. So the first step is simply bringing awareness to that discomfort, right? So an indistractable person, it doesn't mean you never get distracted. Okay. I made up the term indistractable, so I can define it any way I want. Being indistractable doesn't mean you never get distracted. It means you know why you got distracted so that you don't get distracted again in the future, because every distraction only has three potential causes: an internal trigger, an external trigger, or a planning problem. That's it. Every distraction only has these three causes. So what that means, therefore, that if you know that it's only these three causes, a distractible person keeps getting distracted by the same things again and again. Paulo Coelho had a wonderful quote. He said, a mistake repeated more than once is a decision. A mistake repeated more than once is a decision. A distractible person keeps getting distracted by the same things again and again. An indistractable person says, okay, I see what you did to me there. You got me distracted. I'm not going to let that happen again. I'm going to take steps today to prevent getting distracted tomorrow. And if you do that, if you use forethought, there is no distraction we can't overcome.
I loved it. I think it resonates with a lot of our learners as well. They love how real you get when you talk about, gaining more awareness of what the real problem is, like what's the real cost, right? And then becoming undestructible or indestructible is the skill of the century. Marvelously insightful. So thank you
you.
so much, Nir. We are almost at time. I think one thing that I'm really, really interested from your career is learning more about how you build a portfolio career. I think in the new centuries, a lot of people like us are thinking about maybe the corporate ladder isn't just the only path for building a really fulfilling career. So curious to learn what are some tips to help you, build so many different streams of income and doing different things, writing, teaching, consulting. Any tips or advice for people who are aspire to pursue this career path?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is something I'm very passionate about because my career would not have been possible without the internet. No way. You would have never heard my name. I started blogging. So let me back up. So I started a couple companies. My last company was acquired and I had some time on my hands, right? I didn't write at all as a CEO of my past two companies. I didn't have time. Who has time to write? But I enjoyed writing. I always liked writing. So when I took some time off after selling my last company, I didn't think I would do it as a career. I just like writing. So I started writing about how to build habit forming products because I didn't have the answer. And I looked around, I said, where's a book about how do you build habits? I saw that as the screens shrank, right? As we went from desktops to laptops to mobile devices to wearable devices, when the screen shrank, that meant that habits become more important. Because if you're not on someone's home screen, right? If they don't see your external trigger, we have to rely on internal triggers. And so when I came to that realization, this was 2012, I looked around and said, okay, habits are going to be incredibly important when it comes to product design. Where's a book on how to build habits? I didn't find one. So I started researching. I started talking to my friends in Silicon Valley, my former clients and friends and people in the industry. And I started gathering their knowledge, and I spent a lot of time in the Stanford library. I went to Stanford Business School. And so I started, spending a lot of time in the stacks there. And I started blogging about what I was learning, just putting it out there for free, right? Just here's what I'm learning. If anybody finds it interesting, great. And then one day, one of my former professors read my work and said, I really like your stuff. What if we teach class together? I said, sure, let's do it. So that turned into several years of me teaching at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Then later I moved over to the Hasselplatter Institute of Design. And that became my first book, Hooked, which, by the way, I self-published. I literally some people were asking me, they were emailing me and saying, hey, I want to share your work with my team, but it's a bunch of articles. Like, can you put this into a PDF or something? I said, sure. Okay, I'll put together a PDF. I got together with my good friend Ryan Hoover, who later started Product Hunt. Some of you might know him. He met me for a burger and said, hey, how can I help you? I like your stuff. So we worked together to collate my articles. And it turns out if you blog on a topic for a few years and you just focus on that one topic, you'll actually have a lot to say. So it turns out I had a 150-page book. I self-published it on KDP on Amazon. Excuse me. And I get an email from a book agent that says, your book I really like your book. Why aren't you selling it to a big 5 publisher? So I don't know. I never thought that was an option. So I'm telling you this story to illustrate how the internet breaks down so many barriers. It used to be if you wanted to write a book, you had to go pitch to a publisher. Many people still take this route. I think it's unnecessary. You got to pitch to a publisher. Maybe you get some puny advance because they don't know how good your book's going to be. Whereas this day and age, you can just put it out there, put out your thoughts. So I think the best advice I can give folks is to always be aware of what problems you are facing that other people haven't answered to your satisfaction. That's my recipe. I don't write books because I know the answer. I write books because I am looking for the answer. So with Hooked, I didn't find any book about how to build habit-forming products. With Indistractable, I read every book out there about how to control your attention, about distraction, and they all sucked. They all basically said, put away your technology. Well, that's like something only a professor in some ivory tower would say, because I can't. We have to use these devices or we're going to get fired. So only a tenured professor would give such stupid advice. So it's not practical. And so I was looking for a book that I could actually use in my own life. And so I decided to write both of these books. And so if you can follow your curiosity, I think that's probably the best piece of advice I could give everyone.
I love it. You're basically a product manager of your own life that uses the same technique of noticing problems and then creating opportunities for yourself, right? I
Right.
think this
And
is
the blog posts are the MVP, right? I blog about it.
exactly.
If people, yeah,
You get
totally.
product market fit and you continue to scale and do more and more. And then it builds into a thriving
Right.
business.
And I got to give credit to LinkedIn because it gives you access to an audience of people who are like-minded. When I started, the best I could do was use blogger.com, right? But there's no audience there. Today, I post on LinkedIn and there's people who follow me who I can reach to test new ideas, to test new insights, new research I'm working on in a way that I never could before. And anyone can do that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I think some of our audience are getting hooked to your book, Hooked, and they really enjoyed this session. Inspirational story, quite insightful. They learn techniques about how to build habit-forming products, understanding sources of distraction, time management techniques. Is not about having a to-do list, and the key is gaining awareness. I think the if we are taking away with only one and only one thing is the mistake repeated twice is a decision. So I
Yeah.
really, really
That's
loved
not
it.
my
Thank
quote,
you
by the way.
so.
That's Puelo Coelho. I can't take credit for that quote.
Yes. So how Nir, how can people stay with your work, follow your work, and stay, up to date with
Sure.
what you're working on?
Absolutely. Well, of course, you can subscribe to my newsletter here on LinkedIn. And then you can visit my blog, nirandfar.com. Nir is spelled like my first name, Nir, and far.com. And if you go to Nir and Far, there is a workbook, an 80-page workbook for Indistractable that is complimentary. Anybody can get it. That's available at indistractable.com.
Awesome. That's amazing. I'll include those resources in our newsletter as well. So hopefully everybody get a chance to download the complimentary workbook and learn to be indestructible. Thank you so much, Nir, for your
My
time.
pleasure.
And all right,
Thank you so
bye.
much.
Thanks
Thanks.
everyone for
Bye-bye.
joining.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks.